Commission and staff may attend the meeting telephonically. Further, orders from the San Diego County Health Officer prevent persons other than city officials and essential employees to be physically present. The public may view this meeting, submit comments on an item on this agenda, or submit a public comment through the Zoom webinar meeting. Please click on the Q&A icon in the Zoom meeting screen to submit the public comment. Public comments will be accepted until the conclusion of the public hearing on each item. Please make sure to include the item number or name in the comment. Comments will be limited to 300 words and will be entered into the official commission meeting record. Public comments are being accepted now. Please submit your comments as soon as possible. You do not need to wait for an item to be called to submit a comment. Comments will be read during the meeting. Commissioners, if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and wait to be recognized by the chair. Only one person may speak at a time. All right, I call this meeting to order. And as we found out, when we do the pledge, only one microphone is on and we remain seated so that we're all visible. Except we tried the standing up thing and everybody's midriff, well. So let's right hand salute and pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Staff, may we have roll call, please?
All right. Commissioner Serco.
Present.
Commissioner Morose.
Present.
Commissioner Pollock-Rude.
Present.
Commissioner Sotile. Commissioner Sotile.
He is present, Laura. I think he just got kicked out of the meeting. He's coming back in.
There we go. Commissioner Sotile.
Present.
And Commissioner Valles.
Present.
All present.
Thank you.
I'm having problems with my internet. Let me turn off the phone. Hold on. I'm having problems with my internet, so you might lose me. And if you do, I'll call in. That's what I just did. I called in.
Welcome to the El Cajon Planning Commission meeting. Appeals of final decisions of the Planning Commission made this evening must be filed in writing with the City Clerk no later than 5 p.m. Friday, March 26, 2021, and must include the payment of a filing fee. Pursuant to City Council Resolution number 114-79, a commissioner has received evidence related to matter before the Planning Commission other than an unescorted view of the subject property is required to disclose such information at the hearing. At this time, we will take comments from any member of the public on any item of business within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. Under state law, no action can be taken on items brought forward under public comment, except to refer it to staff for administration or place it on a future agenda. And I will note that any participants who wish to put a public comment in, or whether it's not on the agenda or on the agenda item, you do not have to wait for the agenda item to be called to submit your public comment. If there is anyone in attendance who wishes to make a comment under public comment, do we have any comments submitted?
We do not have any comments submitted.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the consent calendar. Before we get all the way into the consent calendar, I'm sorry, I almost forgot to do this in all the right orders. We are welcoming a new planning commissioner to our meeting. This is the first time for Commissioner Valles. Mrs. Devine, do you have a short intro for her?
Sure, I'm sure Commissioner Valles could add on to this, but I just want to recognize that she's bringing to the Planning Commission a wealth of experience from East County. She's been a resident of El Cajon for the last 18 years, as well as a volunteer with the East County Homeless Task Force. She also has a background in the medical profession, so I think she's going to bring some new ideas. And you may recall Ron Valles was the Planning Commission Secretary for a few years, and he's now retired, but Elizabeth is his wife, and so she's got the connection to the city as well. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Welcome
very much.
aboard.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. So a single motion will cover all items on the consent calendar. Does the commission wish to pull any item from the consent calendar?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. And Mrs. Luck, I believe you have something that we need to put out there before we take a vote. I'm afraid you're probably not pointing to the same person.
There we go. No, I was trying to point to my little mute thing.
Oh.
Yes, since Ms. Valles was not a member of the commission at the time of the prior meeting, not sworn yet, she will be abstaining.
Okay. So Commissioner Valles is abstaining from the vote today. Aside from that, does staff have any item they wish to pull for discussion?
No, we do not.
All right. Then let's have ourselves a motion.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Commissioner Sotile, seconded by Commissioner Morose. Roll vote, please.
Commissioner Morose,
Yes.
Commissioner Serco,
Yes.
Commissioner Pollock-Rude,
Yes.
Commissioner Valles,
Abstain.
oh, abstaining, and Commissioner Sotile.
Yes.
Okay. 4-0 is the count.
All
One
right.
abstention.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move on to the public hearings. The first item on our agenda is item number 2. Project name is the Draft Housing Element Workshop. This is not subject to CEQA. Staff is recommending approval. Staff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Serco. I have a few folks joining us for the presentation this evening. Spencer Hayes, who you've seen many times before, as well as Holly Zefram and Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates. They help with the preparation of the housing element. And so just to note, this is a workshop item. We're not asking for any decision. We're simply asking for input and feedback into the draft that was released for public review. Next slide. Thank you. So just a little bit of background information. The housing element is part of our general plan, and it's per California state law that each city must have a comprehensive general plan. The state legislature also has a goal for California that each resident be able to attain decent housing. And so a part of the implementation towards achieving that goal is mandating that each city and jurisdiction in California adopt the housing element to be part of the general plan. Updating it also ensures that we have a robust general plan that is responsive to current needs and addresses state law requirements. And as I mentioned, it was prepared in conjunction with our consultant, Veronica Tam and Associates. So it is one of the state mandated elements of the general plan, but it is a little different than most of the other elements in that there are several statutory requirements. And so how the document ends up reading and being laid out is a little more technical in nature than some of the other policy elements, such as the land use element. And it's also updated on a regular schedule. So there's no statutory requirement for the general plan in and of itself to be updated on a regular basis, but the housing element down in San Diego, we are on an 8-year cycle. And so we have to adopt our next housing element by April 15th, 2021. Although built into the state statutes is a 120-day grace period. So 120 days after April 15th, we're still within the deadline for adoption and submittal. Part of the adoption and submittal process is having the element reviewed by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. They review it for compliance with state law, and they do a review while the element is in draft form. So it's kind of a pre-review before you submit the adopted element to them. And so with the release of the draft element on March 4th, we're also in the process of submitting that to the State Department for their review. And this will be the 6th cycle housing element for El Cajon, and it'll cover the period of 2021 to 2029. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Holly. She is going to give us a little bit of an overview into what is required for us to include within the housing element. Also, a little bit more about the findings that the HCD has to make for the housing element, and then some of the new changes to state law.
Hi, okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Just thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. So there are things that must be examined in the housing element for it to be approved by HCD. So we're looking at the assessment of existing and future housing needs of the community, which includes looking at a projected housing demand that has been approved by the state, which is also known as the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. The city is required to show that it has an adequate sites inventory to accommodate future housing demand. We also look at the opportunities and constraints on housing in the community, and then provide housing programs that address those constraints and the housing needs of residents. The programs include helping to promote housing production, preserving affordable housing that is already present in the community, improving the existing conditions of housing, and also promoting fair housing choice for all residents, regardless of their income levels. Some of the programs have objectives that the city plans to meet over the 8-year planning period, which can be seen in the draft housing element. Next slide, please. So the housing element is required to be found in compliance with state law by HCD. Having a compliant housing element allows the city to be eligible for housing and other related funds, such as SB2 grants, regional transportation and infrastructure funds. And it also makes sure that the city avoids any penalties, which can result in fines, suspension of building permits, which has happened in some cities, such as Pleasanton, and also only having to update, or actually having to update the housing element more frequently. So instead of on an 8-year cycle, the city would have to do it at a 4-year cycle instead. And it also, the city could be having to roll over any unaccommodated RHNA from the previous cycle if they do not have a compliant housing element. Next slide, please.
I could just jump in here, Holly, real quick.
Yeah.
Because it's a workshop, we do want to give you the opportunity to have us pause at any time and ask questions, or if there's something you want us to go into a little more detail, don't feel like you need to wait till the end of the presentation.
Okay, so major changes in this housing element include a comprehensive update to demographic and housing data, and also there are discussions to address the new state laws, which include the new ways to accommodate RHNA, the sites inventory requirements, and also addressing no net loss. There are also discussions on ADU development and laws that pertain to housing development for persons with special needs in the community. There is also housing program. Yes.
May I interrupt you and ask, what no net loss means here.
Veronica, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. This is Veronica Tam. In 2017, the state passed a new law called No Net Loss SB 1626, and essentially it says that when you are supposed to maintain an inventory of adequate sites throughout the entire planning period of your housing element. In the past, it's usually like the adequate sites analysis is a point in time. Once you get an adequate sites at the time of the housing element adoption, you're fine. Your obligations are done. With no net loss requirement, you have to continuously evaluate your site's capacity as your sites are being consumed by development. And so if you continue to build at lower density than you anticipated or you're allowed, or if you assume that you'll get a lot of mixed use, but you get completely just like non-residential development, so that you use up your residential sites inventory in a manner that would not allow you to have the capacity to meet your remaining RENA. So then you're required to replenish your sites inventory. And that's part of the reason why when we did the sites inventory for the housing element, we did a very conservative assumption in terms of capacity, and we also make sure that we have some buffer in there so that we don't run into the no net loss situation too easily.
Thank you. Yes, I remember the point in time evaluation. So
Right.
this means that during the 8-year period, as sites get developed, we
Right.
have to maintain that number. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Yeah, so the housing programs are reflecting these new state laws, and we're also looking at the resources the city has available at the time. So new programs that address the RENA, and of course, no net loss, the new state laws, and also how to facilitate ADU production and making sure to further fair housing in the community. We removed programs that are no longer appropriate, and also combined programs to make similar objectives more easy to complete, and also adjusted level of commitments based on what the city has been able to accomplish so far.
All right, and I think that's where I'm going to jump in. And so kind of as everyone was indicating, assessing what the community looks like presently and then projecting what that looks like in the future is very important for these analyses. And so there's a handful of slides here that cover kind of the community profile, the population, the existing housing, economic status, household data for El Cajon. So El Cajon has been experiencing population growth of approximately 5% per decade for the last couple of decades. I believe that number is projected to be 135,000 residents by 2035, just over that figure. Household size has been increasing up to 3.06 persons per household, which is a potential indicator of overcrowding or families doubling up in existing units. Households with children are the largest component of the population at 35%, followed by single person households at 21%. Nearly 60% of the households in El Cajon are lower income, which in this case, that's characterized by an income less than 80% of the area median income, AMI. AMI in El Cajon is $52,000 per year, which to add to that is nearly 30% less than the county average. Just some more statistics here. Seniors are approximately 12% of the El Cajon population, and a quarter of the population is under the age of 18 years. Our population in El Cajon is slightly younger than our other county cities. Ethnically, the city of El Cajon is a majority white, with Hispanic Latino being the next largest population at 28.5%. I thought an interesting statistic was that 44% of El Cajon residents speak a language other than English at home. Nearly half of our residents are in lower wage sector, so that would be the retail or service sectors. And this is a very telling statistic just because of in light of the pandemic, but In June 2020, data shows a 17.9% unemployment rate, which is compared to a 4.6% unemployment rate in March of 2020.
It looks like Paul has a question.
Oh, yes.
So when I know that our current national statistics don't separate different categories of white, but I do recall that when we were dividing city council districts, we had somebody look at what white meant, and 70% of our white population is Arabic or Chaldean, not European, but Middle Eastern.
So you bring up a good point there, Paul, in that the white and Caucasian category does capture our community members that may be from, from the Chaldean community or from Arabic countries as well. So that's why we included what we think is another statistic here that's helpful to understand our community. The other one that we sometimes look at is the percentage of foreign born. But I think it is a little misleading here to look at the percentage, the ethnicities, and make assumptions about our population, because I don't think it tells the whole story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly. All right. And then in terms of housing, there's been limited housing stock growth within the last couple decades. I believe it's currently at about 2%, if I'm not mistaken, in the report. Most housing stock is multifamily in the city, as we all know, and a majority of the housing stock is for rent. Renter households are larger than owner-occupied households on average. And as we're all aware as well, we do have an older housing stock. About 88% of our housing was constructed over 30 years ago. The median, the 2020 median El Cajon home price was $557,500. And our average rents, you can see here, about $1,200 for a studio unit, or $2,200 for a 3-bedroom apartment. And really, what this is all showing us is that lower income households are struggling to find affordable housing, and even moderate income households up to that $120,000 per year income mark would find purchasing a home difficult in the current market. And to add on to that, lack of affordable housing for low income individuals, combined with that high unemployment rate, increases in persons living in poverty, a reduction in other subsidy programs or programs that serve those with mental illness, for example, have exacerbated the homelessness issue in El Cajon and across the county. The point in time count for El Cajon identified 784 individuals who were homeless, 474 of which were sheltered and 310 were unsheltered. The homeless yes.
Can we pause there? I believe.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. There's multiple hands up there.
Yes. Commissioner Paulick-Rude?
Yeah, just really quick, because I know you were going over the numbers on housing for El Cajon, and that actually currently it's more like 650 based on where we are at right now. And that's not even being exaggeratory. It's ridiculous right now. So for those who want to purchase a home and are qualified, there really is nothing affordable. And even the rents are up, the condos are up, everything's up. So it's really difficult out there for those people who don't have a house and are trying to get back on their feet to find a place. And with building costs up, it just kind of puts another layer on the cake. So it is a little frustrating for everyone.
And that is a good point, that a lot of these data points were obviously taken in 2020, earlier in the year, potentially. So,
and usually you don't see such a rise, but because of just so many, it's a perfect storm right now. I've never seen it go up as much as it has in the past year.
Yeah.
Commissioner Rose, did you have?
Yeah, question. So has anybody, article came out, and I would love to know, I think our city probably does a better job, but 40% of housing costs are now permits, fees, state mandated garbage, you name it. But 40% of a house now to build is all bureaucracy and red tape, and it's got nothing to do with the land or the sticks and bricks costs. So have we heard anything coming down from the state on, lowering fees or anything cities can do to lower fees? Because that's just 40%. I mean, that takes, $600,000 house could actually sell for $380,000, roughly 360. So I'm just curious if that's ever been addressed, or if the state ever talks about ways to lower that through all the, conditions that they pass, whether it's carbon credits, offsetting land costs, just everything that goes into it.
So I know Melissa probably wants to chime in, but I think to start, we do have a discussion of this a little bit later on, but the city actually, from the city, in terms of other cities in the region, our fees are very low. We do not have development impact fees like other cities have, which do add substantial costs. And even our planning permit fees and development, building permit fees are fairly low in that regard. So I don't know if Melissa wanted to chime in there.
Sure. I think Commissioner Moroz, you're talking a little bit more towards state mandates. So, energy code requirements and those types of things. I think I'd like to see perhaps Veronica or Holly, if you've heard anything recent on the state level, looking at the costs that get passed on to housing from those mandates.
Well, that is a difficult question, and you're right. Like, one of the things that city tells us, like, adopt the housing element as soon as possible, because more laws are coming down. Like, so the sooner you adopt it, at least you're not necessarily in meal, but we don't have to keep changing the housing element for that. They don't necessarily deal with the cost that's caused by legislation, but they are trying to provide affordable housing funds in order to allow cities to develop housing, or to make housing less costly to develop with objective standards and that type of legislation. But you're right, and they're just preparing the housing element alone this time is so much more complex than last time, and the costs associated with that. And so I think we all recognize that, but the direction from the state is actually provide funding for affordable housing, and they're doing a much better job than they were probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, thank you.
It looked like we also had a hand up from Commissioner Sotile.
Yes, Spencer. Regarding the homeless population of Cajon exceeding the surrounding cities, do you have any inclination why that is so?
Melissa, did you want to? I think we had talked about this the other day, I believe.
I know that there is some speculation in around some of the different causes of why we have such a larger population. I think some have said, we have more services in El Cajon. We have the East County Regional Center. We have other county services and offices. And I don't know that there's anything definitive necessarily that points to this is why our population is so much larger. But it is quite significantly larger than any other East County city. Although I did read recently that I think they attempted to do a kind of a partial count of homeless individuals in and around the San Diego River, and they're finding more people or counting more people in Santee who are living along the river. So yeah, I don't know that we have anything that we can point to specifically and say this is why, but we do know that we need to address it.
Thank you.
All right, and just to continue on here, we're probably all familiar as well with some of our existing homeless resources. ECTLC, the East County Transitional Living Center, offers a couple different types of programs. We have a rotational shelter that the city provides dedicates funds towards every year. The Housing Navigator, same case. And then there's the Way Back Home program operated through Salvation Army. And let's see here if we can get up to the next slide. Melissa, did you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. So thanks, Spencer. I think that was a good overview of some of the information and data that we're looking at. We're trying to assess housing needs. The next part of the housing element that we want to talk about is looking at constraints. And the state law specifically, asks us to look at market constraints, so economic constraints, and then governmental constraints, which I'll cover in the next slide. I think it's important to note that a lot of the market constraints, city government doesn't have a lot of influence or ability to move the dial on some of these, but we do note them because they do have an impact on the provision of housing. So the first one that Spencer touched on, the unemployment rate, it's very high, we know, due to COVID, and may continue to be high for some time. We really don't know how things will shake out. And we know that having a high unemployment rate can really make it difficult for people to find housing, but then also to retain it once they have it. So it overall just makes the situation more difficult. Construction and land costs are another large constraint, especially for El Cajon, where most of our land is already developed with very little vacant land. And so the land costs are significant. And I think in the analysis in the housing element, it speaks to the fact that we've seen a 100% increase since we looked at the land costs with the last housing element cycle. And then construction costs, including raw materials, but also labor, has significantly increased. We also know, sort of anecdotally, that even finding skilled labor can be difficult for some projects as well. And then another key point in access to housing is obviously financing, especially for home ownership. And the approval rate for mortgage loans has actually decreased. That's lower than it was back in 2012. And then a lot of these constraints or issues are compounded when you look at people of color or in our more disadvantaged communities, because they have less access to opportunities and resources than some of our other residents and community members. Okay, the next section, we talk about governmental constraints. And that really, asks cities to review their land use, their zoning, their fees, their development processes, and to see if there are any constraints or impediments, barriers to the production of affordable housing. And luckily in El Cajon, we've done quite a bit over the last few years. Most of you were with us when we adopted the Transit District Specific Plan, which added new housing capacity in and around the transit center, and then also the Mixed Use Overlay Zone, which created new housing opportunities in our commercial areas. So those went a long way to building capacity for more affordable multifamily housing. But then they also added in additional flexibility with development standards, because we know that most of our projects in the future are infill projects, and there are often difficulties with infill because of existing smaller parcels, the cost of improvements or other issues. So we feel like we've done a really good job recently in the last few years in addressing this and bringing down the barriers to housing on the governmental side, but you'll still see some programs later on that address the further steps that we can take to improve that. And then we also look at what types of housing are we making allowances for. So in terms of accessory dwelling units or granny flats, we have an adopted ordinance. It's something that we're going to need to be updating here in the near future. But we've seen, a significant increase in the number of units that are permitted as ADUs as well. And then we've also made provisions for transitional and supportive housing, and then single room occupancy lodging, or SROs. So we've been successful 3 times now with our motel conversions with that program. And we've added component to our housing element that we'll look at perhaps continuing some of those conversion projects in the future. And then we really have minimal development fees, as Spencer mentioned, so it's not a big impediment to housing development in El Cajon. And we have put in a lot of streamlining over the years to make permitting processing easier. Okay, and then one of the sections of the housing element looks at what are the resources available to the city to assist with the production of housing. And unfortunately, in comparison to the need, the resources are rather small. The city does receive an annual allocation of CDBG funds that goes towards those eligible census tracts, those that on projects in eligible census tracts that, you know, are improvements to the community or good to benefit the residents in those areas. And then we receive between $400,000 and $600,000 in home funds. So both of those funding programs assist with our housing rehabilitation programs. We have single family and mobile home rehabilitation programs for lower income households. And then the city, as the El Cajon Housing Authority, also has access to the low and moderate income housing funds. So those are funds from the former redevelopment agency, successor agency, that are coming back in and are eligible for reallocation to affordable projects. And so we've used those funds in the past to partner with an affordable housing developer on a project. All told, there are only about 1,000 assisted affordable units in El Cajon, those that are subsidized. This is aside from Section 8, but units that were built with a subsidy or assisted later with a long-term subsidy. And some of those are actually at risk of losing their affordability over the period of the housing element as well. And I'm turn it back over to Spencer.
Yeah. So as Holly was kind of mentioning before, a major part of the housing element update is to demonstrate that we have the land inventory to adequately accommodate growth in the city. And we had, with help from VTA planning, we identified a sites inventory. There's a specific methodology for identifying those sites. First and foremost, if staff had knowledge of a property owner who had expressed interest in housing development, that would be a site that we would have included on the housing element. And then there's other criteria to identify those vacant or non-vacant sites that are underutilized. The analysis would look at improvement to land value, or sites that can accommodate a greater floor area ratio, basically increasing the intensity of the existing housing use on that site. And in the report, or in the housing element draft, there is a site inventory map, which I'll bring up in a second so we can all look at that together. But there's also a pretty handy table that actually breaks down, expected number of units and that sort of thing in the appendices of the plan. So with that, I'm going to try to just bring on over that housing element update sites inventory map. Hopefully, did that work? Everyone can see that now? Awesome. And just a quick look at the legend here. Everything in the blue or pink are those sites that are in the mixed use overlay zone or the TDSP. So a lot of the focus was to try to build on the work that we've already done. Like Melissa mentioned, we already had increased capacity with those two plans. So a majority of the sites are actually within those two areas. There's also the green category that are other vacant or underutilized sites that were identified using those other criteria. And then we have a few red dots scattered around, which are projects that have already been entitled, but building permits have not been issued yet. So those technically already count towards our next cycle. So we have a little bit of a head start there, I guess. But I don't know, Melissa, did you want to zoom in here and talk about any sites in particular, or?
Sure. I think we can highlight a few sites. One that I think we mentioned this previously at 300 El Cajon Boulevard, we have a submittal for 116 new townhomes there. So that one's actually already been submitted. So that one is kind of one of our prime sites. Another one, the large site, is the Parkway Plaza site. And this one has the mixed use overlay. And when we adopted the MU overlay for that property, we did hear concerns about the potential of the commercial space being reduced or losing the mall. And so I just wanted to clarify there that even though the site is on the housing element sites inventory, we still do have a specific plan in place for that site, that any significant reduction of commercial square footage would require an amendment of that specific plan. So we're not looking to replace them all. We're just looking to see if we can use maybe some of those exterior surface parking lots for new housing. And then another, I think, site to note is the trolley site, the MTS property. City is still working with MTS. We do have a signed memorandum of understanding for the marketing purposes of that site. So we're hoping that we'll see a project there within the next few years.
And I think
Commissioner Sotile?
Yes.
Going back to the Parkway Plaza site, I think you answered the question, just making use of the parking lots. I was imagining possibly having commercial on the ground floor and then residential above the ground floor, above the commercial sites. Was that consideration, or just the parking lots alone being converted into residential?
It's certainly a possibility. So under the mixed use overlay, you can do residential or commercial or a mix of both. So if we had someone come in with a project with ground floor commercial and residential above, that we could certainly consider that and likely be supportive of it. But because we already have so much commercial space at Parkway Plaza, it may be, that someone comes in with just a residential project to complement what's already there.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Moroz, I think.
Yeah, question. So how do we get around, when we talk about, building in the corridor on El Cajon Boulevard, increasing some density, one of the things that I see being a challenge is, in order to increase some of that density, you have to sometimes do, pedestal parking with, 3 and 4 floors above, but then you get into the cost to build, and then you're back to $2,500 a month 2-bedroom apartments, and then we're really not solving the problem, too much. Yeah, we're getting the housing element, but if you look at what they need for the low income or moderate low income, I just don't know how that addresses that. Is there, because once you start going 3-4 stories, that's very expensive to build the pedestal, 2 stories of parking, and then on top of that, how do we address that?
So it is a complex issue. Most of the zoning that's already in place that we'd be taking advantage of for the sites inventory would allow for residential use up to about 40 dwelling units per acre. So yeah, at closer to 40 dwelling units per acre, you are talking about, potentially stacked flats. But there's nothing to preclude someone from coming in with, say, like a townhome project or something with a little bit less density, provided that we can make sure that we have a bit of a buffer with our sites so that we can make sure that we always have those sites available, like Veronica mentioned earlier. But realistically, a market rate project, is that going to result in housing prices or rental prices that meet the needs of lower income residents? Probably not without a subsidy. And there's just very limited funding for subsidized housing, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for that.
And
Yes.
Melissa, if I could ask a question.
Sure.
So I was actually excited to see some development happen around the transit center, because for a lot of people, that's their first look into El Cajon. But also having lived here and being around there for some businesses and things, I do know that we have a lot of homeless encampments that have developed on that kind of that frontage road behind there, like by the ice company and things like that. So as we're looking to develop it, we also want to make sure that we have safe housing and safe businesses. And I know some of the business owners have struggled with that, with the safety issue. is there a plan in place rather than just sort of pushing people along to be able to provide some kind of shelter or housing for those that have been camping, I'll say kind of on the sidewalks and in some of the vacant, around some of those vacant buildings and vacant spaces?
So in terms of shelter space or housing space for the homeless, one of the things that we have to do is demonstrate that we have enough land that's suitably zoned that allows for emergency shelters. There's no state requirement that the city provide the shelter, build the shelter. And, you know, frankly, I think that the city recognizes that there's a significant cost in providing, you know, a year-round shelter, not only in just the construction, but in the ongoing operational costs that may just not be within reach for El Cajon by itself in and of itself. That maybe a more regional approach is needed to meet this great demand that we have here in El Cajon. I don't think I have a great answer, unfortunately, for you in terms of, you know, where are all these unsheltered people going to go, especially as we redevelop some of these areas. But the hope is that some of these areas are redeveloped, that it becomes less of an attractive space to gather. And I think specifically if you go down Marshall to where we've had that vacant lot next to the BMW dealership, which has been problematic for a number of years, that self-storage project that you know will be coming online here within the next year or two, hopefully will go a long way to dealing with some of the issues that people deal with out there in that neighborhood because of some of the effects of having that unsheltered community in that neighborhood. But it is a longstanding issue of how do we address the unsheltered folks in our community. And I don't think the housing element in and of itself is going to be able to answer that question for us of how we're going to meet that particular need. But we are laying out the different strategies that we are putting forth to try to do that, which is continuing those programs that we currently have in place. The city's been funding the Housing Navigator, the emergency motel vouchers, the Way Back Home program with Salvation Army, and then continuing to try to work with some of our partners to come up with better long-term solutions.
Okay. I guess at this point, if there's any questions about specific sites or suggestions for anything to look into, that would be great. But if not, we can continue on with the PowerPoint.
I'd just like to make one more comment about the Parkway Plaza site. As I was reading through that, I have to say that really did seem like a great opportunity to develop, because it is a very large site. And when you think of places like downtown San Diego and the gas lamp district, where, I mean, we're not the gas lamp district, but, you know, where they have very effectively had, you know, those mixed use spaces, you have restaurants and businesses on the ground floor, and then you have apartments and things above that. So in an area that didn't have a lot of land, they have definitely utilized it. And I kind of see something like that happening with parts of that space. And again, like Melissa alluded to, you do have a lot of just empty parking lot space as well that could be developed. So with the close proximity to the freeway, you know, and there's already pretty good infrastructure, I would say, with Fletcher Parkway being a pretty big, you know, big street. It did seem like a very good suggestion for trying to utilize that space. And I think in the housing element, it said the owner was also very interested. So the owner of the land. So I think that looked like a very good idea. And I hope to see that start to come to fruition.
Thank you.
All right. And hopefully everyone can see that I jumped back over to here, and I'll continue on to the next slide. And so the next thing we wanted to move into was a discussion of the goals, policies, and programs, which is kind of the last section of the draft housing element. I'll just read out the main kind of goal objective. and that is to increase, improve, and preserve a variety of safe, decent, affordable housing units, meeting the existing and future needs of El Cajon residents of all income levels, including special needs populations. And from there, we have 6 kind of major objectives, which all have policies associated as well as programs associated with those policies. So what I have on the slides here are just the objective and the programs, but there's obviously a lot more to this discussion than's on the slides. Melissa, I think we're just going to kind of cover some of the highlights at this point. But basically, objective number 1 is to accommodate an increase in residential units for all income levels. And obviously, the major point of a major section of the housing element is to identify those sites to meet the RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Another program that is suggested in the housing element draft is to kind of promote our accessory dwelling units, since we have seen quite a bit of interest in those, and then continue to pursue opportunities to partner for affordable housing development. And I don't know if Melissa, you had anything to add on that one?
No, that's perfect.
Okay. Objective 2 was to improve the quality of existing and future residential units and neighborhoods. And some of these programs are going to be familiar to you. The first one being the Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program that has been operating for quite a while now. And that again provides kind of smaller loans to make improvements for lower income households to their homes. The next one would be, and another main one that you probably heard of recently is the Multifamily Inspection Program. That one's currently on hold just due to the pandemic, but I think it's been relatively successful. The housing inspector has been through a huge number of units in the city so far, identifying any deficiencies there, so that property owners can make those improvements to make those units habitable and address any kind of the aging issues that we have with some of our housing stock. Anything to add there, Melissa?
No, I think that sounds good.
All right. The third objective was to preserve existing affordable housing stock to the extent feasible and when deemed in the public interest. So the program would be to continue to participate in the housing choice vouchers, which is operated through the county. The next one would be the preservation of at-risk of converting to market rate units. Melissa mentioned that we have a total of about 1,000 assisted units at this point, and that I'm not sure the figure, but a handful of them, many of them are at risk of converting over the next cycle. And then to continue participating in those homeless services that were mentioned earlier in this presentation as well.
So quick question, what makes certain assisted housing at risk of converting? Is that lack of funds?
So that would be the affordability covenants expiring. Usually they're at like a 55-year, or I'm not sure all the different types of affordability covenants, but basically that would expire during the next cycle.
Yeah, an example of that would be the Lexington Senior Apartments project. So that, and I think I maybe mentioned that in the project's presentation last time, that project went through a process and competed for low-income housing tax credits, and they were able to extend the affordability of that project out into the future. So as those sort of programs or those funding sources and their associated covenants sunset, that's when you might see one of those projects become market rate.
Thank you.
And then objective number 4 is pretty straightforward. There's only one program identified under it. It's basically to provide increased opportunities for home ownership, and that is through the first-time homebuyer assistance program, which has been operating and is programmed to continue operating. Objective number 5 is to remove any governmental constraints to housing development. And I believe Melissa touched on these already, but there are a handful of zoning code amendments that were identified as kind of being key to that effort. So for example, the updates for low barrier navigation centers and emergency shelters and supportive housing to meet kind of some of the new state regulations surrounding those. Also updates to the density bonus section in our code to meet some of the new state requirements and legislation. Again, the promotion of ADUs and their creation, and to establish some objective design standards especially for multifamily developments. Melissa, anything there? No. I
think that's perfect. Yeah, our last objective is just to affirmatively further fair housing. And one of the primary ways we do that is through our contract with CSA, San Diego County. They provide fair housing services for El Cajon. And another way we do that is just making sure that housing opportunities are equally distributed through the city of El Cajon. When you saw the site inventory previously, you could see that, we weren't concentrating housing in any one particular place. We're obviously putting it where it makes sense, where there's available transit and commercial services, but you'll see those spread throughout the city. I think that wraps up our plan. So I hope you've all had an opportunity to, review it and take a look at it. We are going to have it available for public review concurrently with the HCD review. So there's plenty of time for people to read it, really dig in and look at some of those programs and policies, the site's inventory, and give us their feedback. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work on the home, the housing element. And thank you to Veronica Tam and Associates. That's a lot of work you guys put into this. Mr. Sotile, I saw that hand.
Yes, I do have a question. It's on page, let's see, page 74, I believe, regarding the, let me read that part. In 2018, the city of El Cajon updated its density bonus ordinance. State density bonus law has been revised since the city's most recent update. Therefore, the existing ordinance is no longer in compliance with state law and will be required to be revised as an implementation program. Because density bonus law is governed by state law, the city may want to consider removing the substance from its density bonus ordinance and simply refer to state law to avoid the need to modify the code each time the state law is amended. So when I read that, to me, it seems that the state really has a lot of control on local government. I think the state maybe too much control on local government. And by making it automatic, our laws change or our codes change automatically with the state law, it doesn't give the city time to consider the consequences of that law or think about what can we do to make it better or maybe fight it a little bit or whatever. So I kind of tend not to agree with making it automatic, to have the city council and the planning commission to look at these situations and see if they're beneficial for the city or not beneficial to the city and act accordingly. That's a suggestion that I like to make in that particular area.
I think that's a great suggestion there, Commissioner Sotile. So that's a recommendation that the density bonus changes would be brought forward as a subsequent ordinance. So if that's something that the commission feels that they wouldn't want to refer back to state law as it pertains to the density bonus, we could do that. I think the only drawbacks there are that we do have to comply with the state's density bonus laws, so that if for some reason a project comes forward, they would have the city's density bonus law, which could be different or maybe lagging behind the state law. And sometimes, especially with affordable housing projects, there's the potential as well for litigation if the city doesn't follow the state density bonus law. I'm not sure if Veronica or Holly had anything to add regarding that suggestion.
I think more and more cities are feeling that it's more convenient to refer to state law because they change, and sometimes the law changes for just one little thing, and if you're not paying attention, then you missed it. And 1 year they change it like 2 or 3 times, and so you would be constantly updating it, maybe for just minor revisions. So I think it's up to the city. Some cities, just like what you're suggesting, keep it inside your zoning code, but you just have to be aware that there are new changes, and regardless of what your zoning code says, a project comes in, you have to follow what is the law at the time. So
primarily, I like to keep the separation there between state and local government. I think it's wise. I mean, it is convenient automatically, but then again, what's the purpose of the city council or the planning commission to look at these different changes and see what wisdom is there? And they said, maybe we can make an appeal to the state for one reason or another. That's why I like to keep the separation there. I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel about that, but that's my feeling towards that.
Yeah, Commissioner Pollock-Rude.
And just really quick on that, because in being in my business, I deal with regulations all the time. So I'm constantly going to have, well, more so to the city of San Diego, not so much to the city of El Cajon, because El Cajon's much better and I love it here because the city of San Diego is a bit of a mess. But regarding all these laws that they put on builders and things like that, that costs more money for builders to build. So the city of San Diego is a nightmare because a lot of builders are just leaving because they put so many different layers on the already overlayered cake. So I agree regarding, I wish that we didn't have to abide by some of the state rules, but we have to. But it would be nice to have that separation because they aren't always the highest and best use for allowing the housing and the RENA numbers to be there if we're discouraging people from building and putting standards on them that are unattainable, especially with the building costs and everything the way they are right now. So I just think having to stay up on things like this, and which I have been doing, but I am frustrated about it. So I agree.
Yeah, and I know that
story. It's been a long day for me, but I do understand the frustration that he's talking about adding, more onto trying to be productive, and we're counterproductive by adding more things on building.
Yeah, and this is something that we as a city don't have a choice of compliance. Yeah. It's just a matter of whether it's in our ordinance or if it says in our ordinance, see the state ordinance. And I like to be informed of changes like this. I know we can put an appeal in possibly, but we can't say no.
Yeah.
But correct. We want to know when things are changing so that we can stay abreast. We can know what the new standard is. I know the first time I saw the zoning ordinance and I sat down, I read through probably 70% of it. And I was like, wow, this is so long and so boring and so full of redundancy. But that was before I even looked at California state building laws. And I was like, oh, can't keep all that in my head. So I think I would agree with Commissioner Sotile that I want us as a city to maintain the standards. We're not going to be able to buck the state, but we will be able to present it as these are our standards.
Correct.
If I could just put in my 2 cents. Paul is correct. There are things that are mandated by the state, but in some instances, if we stay on top of state legislation and even in some cases federal legislation, we might have a chance to use our own discretion when it comes to amending or formulating our municipal code. And that's happened a couple times in the past where we were aware of things ahead of time and therefore were able to craft things to El Cajon's advantage. So it does pay to pay attention to those things. Just a comment.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or anything that you noticed in the housing element that you want to discuss? Questions for staff? Questions for Veronica Tam?
I just had a quick question. I know they referenced some of the programs they have for people to purchase housing, the grants and things like that. And knowing the pricing there is a little low, do they ever kind of adjust that for the current pricing market? Because I know one of them was it was a 550 quota max for purchase price, and I don't know what anybody could get for that right now for a house. So I was just wondering how often that they re-up that to reevaluate, because I know it was done in 2020, which would be totally fine for 2020. But I just didn't know if there's any reevaluations on that for those who want to utilize that program.
So yes, I wish Jamie, our housing, I'm sorry, her title, housing manager, was here to answer specifically. But when I was working with housing, I did process that a couple times. I believe we can request one update per year, or we can use the county default. So it's always almost a gamble, if you will, if you want to update and potentially be higher than that county number, or just go with the county-wide number. So yes, you can. It does update on a yearly basis.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other questions or discussion items? I do want to commend our planning staff and Veronica Tam for helping us in Elkhorn avoid just sticking all the development into large apartment buildings on Elkhorn Boulevard. I'll never forget that one housing element update where they just said, oh, we'll just put 20-story buildings right there. And we've been doing an amazing job. You guys have done an awesome job in identifying vacant or underutilized sites, the zoning overlays that provides the flexibility and freedom for the landowners to determine what use they want. And if they want to put in residential above commercial, that's within their rights. That's within the code. And I love the look of 2 or 3 story retail, office, residential. We'll see what comes. I mean, it's all up to the market, but you guys have done an amazing job making the Reno numbers work within the constraints of keeping El Cajon looking lovely. So when you come in on the 8, you see trees, not buildings.
I concur. The staff has done an excellent job in this program. Concur. It's a lot of work, a lot of writing, and I say, wow, this is really extensive. Good job. Well done.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your comments. I'll just note that since this is a workshop item, there is no action to be taken. We will be bringing the housing element back for your consideration as part of a notice public hearing once we've completed the public review process and the environmental process. So it'll be a few months down the line.
Now we have a few attendees that have not made any comments at all. We don't have, this isn't a hearing, it's not a public hearing, or it is a public hearing, but we haven't really opened it up to see if those in attendance have any comments. I'm not sure if at this point, those of you watching have anything you want to ask or submit a comment, but I will remind you that if you want to comment, you can comment at any time and staff will pick up on those comments and we will read them into the record. Barbara, we didn't actually open a public hearing because technically this is more of a workshop than a public hearing. So we don't actually have to close anything because we didn't open it. Am I
Right.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
you're fine.
All right. Just want to make sure I didn't miss something. Every once in a while, I forget to open or close things.
Well, as you noticed just now, I couldn't figure out which one was audio and which one was video. So,
All right. Well, staff, thank you for the presentation. A wonderful job as usual. And it's one of those tug wars with the city being confined. We don't have vacant land where we can just magically go, oh, well, we'll expand over here. So thank you for all your work in that. All right. I think that ends the agenda item. Are there any other items for consideration?
There are no other items for consideration this evening.
Okay. And we don't have any further staff communications. No commissioner reports or comments. So I think the next item on our agenda is adjournment.
I second that.
I'll make the motion too. Motion made by Commissioner Circo, second by Commissioner Sotile. A roll vote, please.
Hi, Commissioner Circo,
Yes.
Commissioner Morose,
Yes.
Commissioner Pollock Rude,
Yes.
Commissioner Sotile,
Aye.
and Commissioner Bias.
Yes.
Motion carried 5-0.
All right. This concludes the Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission meeting is adjourned to April 6th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Good night.